Mahogany doors of Vantage Capital's 50th floor boardroom had never opened for a man in a gray janitor's uniform. Not once in 11 years. But on the morning everything changed, 32 executives rose from their leather chairs in unison, and the woman who had just called him, just the help, felt her coffee cup slip from her fingers and shatter across the marble floor. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, in the quiet dignity of people the world overlooks, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment below, share this story with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Kindness Corner, because what you're about to watch will stay with you long after it ends. Marcus Reid had been cleaning the floors of Vantage Capital since he was 26 years old. Now, at 51, his hands were rough from 2.5 decades of mops and polish and late nights spent alone in empty hallways while the rest of the city slept. He moved through the building each evening like a ghost, invisible to the men and women in tailored suits who rushed past him without a glance, their eyes fixed on phones, on meetings, on numbers that mattered more to them than the man who kept their world clean. Marcus had grown used to being unseen. He had grown used to the way people said, "Excuse me," to the space where he stood rather than to him directly, the way they stepped around him as though he were a fixture of the building rather than a human being with a heartbeat and a history. What none of them knew, what none of them had ever bothered to ask, was that Marcus Reid had once stood in boardrooms just like this one, not with a mop in his hand, but with a briefing folder, presenting quarterly strategies to men who called him sir. 26 years ago, before his wife's illness drained every account he owned, before the medical bills swallowed his home and his savings, and eventually his career, Marcus had been a rising analyst at a firm not unlike this one. He had built forecasting models that saved companies millions. He had been, by every measure that mattered in that world, brilliant. But grief and debt have a way of rewriting a man's life without asking permission. And when his wife passed, and the bills kept coming, Marcus took the only job that would have him fast enough to keep a roof over his daughter's head. He never told anyone at Vantage Capital about his past. He simply showed up every night, did his work with quiet precision, and went home to raise his daughter alone, carrying a secret that he had buried so deep even he sometimes forgot it was there. The daughter, Amara, was 24 now, sharp-minded and fiercely proud of her father in a way that made Marcus's chest ache every time she looked at him like he'd hung the moon. She had grown up watching him leave for work in that same gray uniform, watching him come home smelling of bleach and exhaustion, and never once did she hear him complain. What she didn't know, until recently, was how much her father had sacrificed to keep her sheltered from the truth of how far he'd fallen, and how hard he'd fought every single day to make sure she never felt the weight of it. The morning it all changed began like any other, except for one small, cruel moment that set everything into motion. Marcus was refilling the coffee station outside the executive boardroom when Vanessa Cole, the newly appointed chief operating officer, breezed past him with an entourage of assistants trailing behind her. She was in the middle of an urgent phone call, her voice sharp with the kind of impatience that comes easily to people who have never had to ask permission to exist in a room. Without breaking stride, without even glancing his way, she gestured dismissively toward Marcus and said into her phone, "No, don't worry about him. He's just the help," as though he were a piece of furniture that happened to be blocking her path. The words landed like a slap, not because Marcus hadn't heard worse in his years of quiet invisibility, but because of who happened to be walking directly behind her. The elevator doors at the end of the hallway chimed open, and out stepped Daniel Reyes, the founder and CEO of Vantage Capital, along with the entire board of directors, arriving for a surprise all-hands strategy session that none of the staff had been warned about. Daniel Reyes was a legend in the financial world, a man who had built Vantage Capital from nothing after starting his career the same way countless underestimated people do, from the bottom, doing work that others considered beneath them. He heard Vanessa's words clearly. He watched Marcus's face carefully, searching for the flicker of humiliation that most people tried to hide, and what he saw instead was a stillness, a composure that only comes from a man who has weathered far worse storms than a careless insult. Daniel Reyes stopped walking. He turned toward Marcus with an expression that made everyone in the hallway go quiet, and then he said the words that would change everything, though at the time no one understood their significance. He said, "Marcus, it's been a long time. I didn't know you worked here." The hallway fell into a stunned silence. Vanessa Cole turned slowly, her phone still pressed against her ear, forgotten mid-sentence, as she watched her extend his hand toward the janitor she had just dismissed as nothing. What Vanessa didn't know, what almost no one in that building knew, was that 15 years earlier, before Vantage Capital existed, before Daniel Reyes had 2 dimes to rub together, he had been a struggling entrepreneur pitching a small and proven idea to investors who laughed him out of every room he entered. Every room except one. Marcus Reid, then a junior analyst with more empathy than ambition, had been the only person willing to sit with Daniel after hours, unpaid, and help him refine his financial models until they made sense. Marcus had believed in him when no one else did. He had stayed late, sacrificed his own advancement, and quietly poured his expertise into a stranger's dream, never asking for credit, never expecting anything in return. When Daniel finally secured funding and built Vantage Capital into the empire it became, he searched for Marcus to thank him properly. But by then Marcus had vanished into the private grief of losing his wife and the desperate scramble to survive, and Daniel never found him. Until now. The all-hands meeting that followed was unlike anything Vantage Capital had ever seen. Daniel Reyes walked into that boardroom with Marcus at his side, and instead of taking his usual seat at the head of the table, he asked Marcus to sit there instead. He told the room, every director, every executive, every person who had walked past Marcus 1,000 times without seeing him, the story of a young analyst who had given up his evenings and his own career momentum to help a stranger with nothing but an idea and desperation in his eyes. He told them that Vantage Capital, the company that employed all of them, the company whose success funded their bonuses and their corner offices, existed because Marcus Reid had chosen kindness when kindness cost him something. And then Daniel Reyes did something no one expected. He stood from his chair, faced Marcus directly, and said that effective immediately, Marcus would be joining the executive board as a senior strategic advisor, with a compensation package that reflected not just his brilliance but the decades of dignity he had shown while the world overlooked him. One by one, every executive in that room rose to their feet. Not because protocol demanded it, but because something in their chests told them this was a moment that deserved to be honored standing up. Vanessa Cole stood too, her face pale, her earlier words echoing back at her with a weight she couldn't outrun. She approached Marcus after the meeting, her composure cracked wide open, and apologized in a voice that trembled with genuine shame, admitting that she had never once looked at him as a person, only as a role, and that she would carry the memory of her own carelessness for a long time. Marcus, gracious as he had always been, told her that he forgave her, because he understood better than most how easy it is to walk past someone's story without ever asking what it contains. That evening, Marcus came home to Amara still wearing his gray uniform, the same one he'd worn for 25 years, and when he told her what had happened, she wept in his arms, not out of surprise at his brilliance, because she had always known that was there, but out of relief that the world had finally caught up to what she'd known her whole life. She told him that watching him rise that day, after everything he had quietly endured, was the proudest moment of her life, and Marcus held her the way he had every night since her mother passed, grateful beyond words that his years of sacrifice had led them both to this moment. Before we reach the end of this story, if you've made it this far, do something for me. Drop a comment below and tell me the word "seen," because sometimes the kindest thing we can do for another person is simply to look at them and truly see who they are. Marcus Reid never forgot what it felt like to be invisible, and he made a promise to himself that day that he would never let another person in that building feel unseen the way he once had. He started a mentorship program at Vantage Capital, quietly pulling aside the newest hires, the interns, the overlooked support staff, and giving them the same thing Daniel Reyes had once given him, which was simply the gift of being noticed. Years later, when people would ask Marcus how he managed to hold on to his kindness through decades of being overlooked, he would simply say that dignity was never something other people could take from him, because it never lived in their eyes to begin with. It lived in his own heart, patient and unshaken, waiting quietly for the world to catch up. If this story touched your heart even a little, if it reminded you that every person you pass today might be carrying a story far greater than you can imagine, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Corner for more stories that remind us why kindness always finds its way home. And follow my YouTube channel. Please subscribe, like, and comment. And follow my YouTube channel. Please subscribe, like, and comment.